Hello out there, and welcome to the inaugural 2022 Giller Prize Master Panel. My name is Ilana Rabinovich, and I'm delighted to welcome you to tonight's event, focusing on the art and craft of book cover design. It's the first of 6 master panels this year, one each month through June. I'd like to welcome tonight's moderator, Lisa Yeager. Lisa is an experienced art director and designer at Penguin Random House Canada. Most recently, she designed Disorientation by Ian Williams and his 2019 Scotiabank Giller Prize winning novel, Reproduction. Our panelists are Kelly Blair, who designed last year's Giller winning What Strange Paradise by Omar El Akkad. Laura Boyle, who art directed Chaluchi Onwe Malukwe Onyobia's The Son of the House. Kelly Hill, who designed Miriam Tave's Fight Night, and Jack Smyth, the artist behind The Listeners by Jordan Tannehill. Audience, please feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit questions. They'll be put to the panel in the last 15 minutes of tonight's broadcast. I'm as eager as you are to get to it, so without further delay, please welcome Lisa Yeager and our panelists.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Thank you, Alana. Thank you for joining us, everyone out there. I'm Lisa, as Alana mentioned. I'm art director and designer at Penguin Random House Canada. I am super excited to be here with this panel of great book designers. So let me introduce them. There's Kelly Blair. She is designer of the winning book, What Strange Paradise. She is art director at Pantheon Books, an associate art director at Knopf, both in the US, and she's a freelance illustrator. We have Laura Boyle. She is art director at Dundurn Press and has worked in book publishing for 13 years. As well, she is a freelance illustrator and designer of children's books and other special projects. She designed The Son of the House. Kelly Hill has over 20 years experience in publishing and is a published author and illustrator of 4 children's books inspired by Anne of Green Gables. She designed Fight Night. And Jack Smyth has worked as a designer at Little Brown, Simon & Schuster, and Fourth Estate, and in 2019 set up his freelance studio in the UK. He designed The Listeners. So welcome, everyone. I am thrilled to chat with you all. And I know you're excited to be here too as well, because typically as book designers, we are behind the scenes and we don't often get together and chat. So this is special. But before we get into it, I wanted to learn just a little bit about you. And I was wondering, what's your favorite way to start your workday? Because I know for me, it's a cup of coffee. I stream my news, I check Instagram, but what's it for you guys? Do you exercise, do you call a friend, do you walk the dog? Jack, why don't we start with you, because you're going to be up in a few hours, right?
Yeah, I haven't got far to go. Yeah, I just like to get up and try to get into my studio as early as possible. I'm lucky that my studio is only about a 10-minute cycle from where I live. So if I can get in there like before 8 o'clock in the morning, then I've got an hour to myself before emails start coming in, and just have a cup of coffee and, you know, settle into the day and try not to look at social media. That's the last part doesn't always go very well, but yeah, that's kind of, if I can get out of bed early enough, that's what I'm aiming for.
Nice. And what about you, Laura Boyle?
Yeah, I try to wake up a couple hours before work starts, just so I can I don't know, live a life, I guess, that's not just work, since now work is in my house. So, yeah, I get to try to move around a bit and wake up.
And Kelly Hill?
So yeah, definitely coffee starts my day. And then ideally, everyone who lives in my house leaves, which hasn't happened consistently over the last couple of years, but by some miracle, my children went to school today, so it was a good day.
And Kelly Blair, what's it like for you?
Yeah, I think I don't have a lot of exciting things to add, but coffee for sure. And I read the paper online. So I start the day with the news, I would say, more than anything. I'm
Oh,
walking the dog, of course.
yes. Well, it sounds like we all like to ease into our day, which is understandable. This list has beautiful covers. Congratulations for such wonderful work. As designers, we are often using a combination of skills, whether it's sketching a concept, painting, hand lettering, collecting samples from nature, or working digitally most often. When I looked closely at all your covers together, I realized there's a variety of styles being used, and you've each chosen a different technique. And I wondered about the importance of technique in cover design. Did you consciously choose the technique, or does it come naturally? And maybe tell us a little bit about your process in using it and getting to that final design. And maybe we start with you, Kelly. You have the award-winning book, What Strange Paradise, which has a gorgeous photo on it, but I feel like there's more to that photo than meets the island than we're just looking at.
Well, thank you. It's such an incredible book that I honestly felt so lucky to work on this book jacket. It's such an important story that I think we're all reading in the news, but maybe didn't have like such an incredible sort of access to the emotional side of it on such a more intimate scale. And I think that is part of what came into the design of this jacket. I think it needed to bring kind of into focus what it felt like on an individual level, like the loneliness and the fear, but also the scale, playing with scale between the image and the type also gives this, like, you kind of zoom out and realize like sort of how small and how precarious the situation is with refugees traveling by boat. So
That's true. There's a lot of tension between the type and then this very calm image. And I noticed like the glow of yellow on it, which is amazing. Would someone else like to go next? Jack, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about the rest of you guys, but sometimes when you're reading a manuscript for a book, you get an idea, and the first one comes to mind, and you kind of go, "Oh yeah, I'm sure that's not the one," but I keep going, and then sometimes your first idea is the one that works out. And with this book, it was that the book centers around characters who hear like a hum that not everyone can hear, and it kind of pushes them into like strange paths. And I just tried to think about how to visualize a hum, and spiraling out from a central character was one easy way of doing it. But the technique of using a hand-drawn spiral was just initially to get the idea down, but then I kind of really liked the way that felt in terms of it's imperfect, and it seems a bit like jaunty and a bit almost like done by a human hand, as if someone who's being affected by this hum is doing the drawing as well. And I think in terms of technique, that's something I've always been really interested in, is doing something by hand, whether it's gorgeous ornate lettering, or if it's a collage, or if it's a piece of illustration. The technique of choosing a hand-rendered piece really communicates like a really human factor to the viewer. And I think that's a really nice aspect. And I think that's the thing, you can have the same idea, but you have an idea, but the way in which you manifest it will change the meaning and the effect it has on the viewer. And that's how this came across. Okay.
Yes, certainly. Like that spiral could have been done digitally, but you chose to do it hand-drawn.
Yeah, or I didn't even necessarily choose. I kind of just did it, kind of
started that way.
Yeah, it just started out, and it's like that's a lovely thing sometimes about working by hand, is that you surprise yourself by going, oh, I thought that would look bad, but that actually probably might work. But yeah, it could be done a variety of different ways. But I think this felt right for the book, which is a lovely one that happens when you don't necessarily plan it out, but the process takes you that direction.
Kind of a happy accident.
Yeah. It's nice to allow for those in the process work.
And Kelly Hill, you have an iconic flame and jewel tones on your cover as well. How did that come about?
So I would say that this is sort of a type-driven cover, and it did come naturally because I think all designers would agree that if you get 2 short words for a title that rhyme, and a name like Miriam Toews, especially in Canada, you're going to want to make the most of all of those words on a cover. The font that I used is Champion, which comes from like wood cut type, and is the sort of thing that would be used on a boxing poster, an old boxing poster, which I thought was apt for this title, which is of course not what the book is about at all, but I just thought type people might be interested in that. The flame came from, within the book, there's a relationship between a grandmother and her granddaughter, 10-year-old granddaughter. And the grandmother tells her that she has a light inside of her, a flame inside of her, and it's her job, and it's almost her only job to not let that go out. So the flame became an important sort of theme. And then just the palette, I love color, and Miriam's voice is so unique, and she leans into quirkiness. So I thought I'm going to try sort of a more unusual color palette with this one. And just sort of an aside about Miriam, one of the very first books that I ever designed was A Complicated Kindness back in 2004. So I feel like I can kind of summarize my whole career in terms of Miriam Toews, which is, I mean, every couple of years I've been designing Miriam Toews books. So, which is, what more could you ask for? She's amazing, and she gets Giller nominated every once in a while as well. So that's amazing.
She is amazing, and so are your covers for her books. They're great, and that's a great cover. And that was interesting. It's interesting to hear about the type, because that's not just one font. You're actually mixing the weights that are offered in that font.
Yeah. So just so that the IGHT wouldn't stack exactly, it's more interesting if it doesn't, I think. And then the different widths of this font are named like for boxing categories, like heavyweight, welterweight, featherweight, that sort of thing. So yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool.
It's really nice because like the different weights give like lots of depth to the type, which sometimes can feel very flat when you have a type like cover, but there's so much to like lean into when in that cover. It's really, really affecting.
Yeah, it's almost like they're moving in and out. That's a good point. Almost like the flame as well, like it has that. And these are all things we think about too, like the movement on the front cover, or your spiral is very mesmerizing in a way, I find. And the fact that you got it over a spine, over the type on the spine is, how did you do that?
They won't go for this, but yeah, I mean, fair, yes, it was good of the author and the publisher to lean into it and to go with that, because sometimes the legibility question comes up quite a lot. I'm sure you all hear that quite frequently. But it looked like
the back cover was also only the image. Was there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay. The types on the
cool.
side. I see. Cool.
Yeah. So I just kept it quite. Yeah. Didn't interrupt the spiral at all.
And this is interesting because I do feel like a lot of book design is, that balance between concept and type and color and tone, and it can get, there's, I don't know, a lot to play with there. It's not just about having a photo and putting type on it. You're thinking about, like, Kelly Blair, you could have chosen much smaller type and made a much quieter cover overall, because that photo is quite serene.
Yeah, and it would have a whole different feeling. Like each of those choices expresses a completely different mood, I think. And yeah, scale is something kind of amazing to play with in that regard. And I think your type, Kelly Hill, plays into scale also because you kind of get these receding and more like forward characters, which also feel like different voices at the same time.
Right.
Mm.
Good point. And Laura Boyle, you have managed to, you're working with an artist's work, Erin Marin, and you are putting type with an artist's work, which can take, you know, some sensitivity, right? And a lot of collaboration there. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, yeah, so I was with the typography, I wanted the type to interact with the image somewhat, just so that they weren't like, you know, one on top of the other. Erin Marin is an illustrator from New York City, and he does a lot of collage work. And his illustrator name is New Tokyo. You guys should check out his Instagram page. We were looking for this cover to put across a lot of boldness and vibrancy, and another aspect of it too that we were hoping to bring out was the dual narratives of the two women main characters. The Son of the House had been previously published by Penguin South Africa and also another publisher in Nigeria, so it did already have two covers existing. So we decided, like so many publishers do, to give it our own treatment. So yeah, I wasn't really sure of the direction to go, and I didn't really have, like you were mentioning, a technique in mind when I set out looking. I was just kind of trying to show a vibe, I guess, or a tone. And yeah, so when I came across New Tokyo's work on a website called African Digital Art. And there was already like, I had already like considered a bunch of different directions, but his work was, I don't know, it just felt like a perfect fit, I guess. He does a lot of collage, and his work often centers Black women. So he did a lot of the image research for the cover, or no, all of it, I guess. He found these photographs in the collection of a photographer, New Zealand photographer, Brian Brake, and then the botanical illustration behind the women is the Nigerian national flower. That's a print from 1905. And yeah, so that's just a bit of background. We ended up bringing some of the elements from the front cover onto the back, and it was our publisher, Scott Fraser, who acquired the book. And he when he saw, like, we were sampling different colors for the cover, he was like, I want that orange. So I was like, you got it. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I think it all came together really well, but it was a pretty long process that spanned over a year, really, because we acquired the book in 2019. And then the pandemic hit, and I was furloughed for a couple of months, and we pushed back all of our books for a few months. And then when I came back to work, this was one of the first books that I turned my attention to. And yeah.
Well, it's a great cover. So you kind of knew you wanted to bring in another artist to do the cover, or did you sort of play around with mock-ups beforehand?
I did play around with some
You
mock-ups
remember?
and some ideas. I mean, yeah, it was a long time ago. I had this idea of using like textiles, but specifically Ankara textiles. But then I was looking at other covers on the market, and it just seemed like a lot of people were already doing that. And it maybe felt like it would be cliche, or like I worried about that. So it did feel like the right decision to look for an illustrator.
Excellent work. Really nice. Sometimes, I'll go on to our next question. Sometimes we're put in touch with authors directly to work with them. Usually we work with editorial, but sometimes we're talking to authors. It could be a number of reasons. I recently worked with last year, worked with the first-time author who wrote his memoir, and he felt strongly about having a certain style of art. It was a tattoo art on the cover, and super cool idea. And when we kind of figured out that I would be illustrating it, I wanted to know, my question was, what does that mean to him? Like, I needed to know that. And it was helpful to know because along with input from sales and collaborating with editorial, it kind of helped me sort out what would be in the final art, as well as like feedback from the design team that we work with. And it helped me shape the whole visual story on the jacket. So in your experience, what questions do you like to ask authors or editors before you start designing their book? I mean, I know we all start with a cover brief, but beyond that, what kind of questions do you like to ask? And maybe Kelly Hill, would you like to start us off with that? I know you have some long time relationships with authors. We mentioned Marion Taves. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think people might be surprised to know that many of us don't actually speak to an author before we start designing the books, and that we actually would probably look at a manuscript. We would chat with the editor. We start with a creative brief, which has all sorts of information about the book. But my favorite parts of the creative brief are the ones that are sort of informed by the author in a way. So I love to look at, we've created our own creative brief. Lisa and I work in the same art department. And so one of my favorite parts of the brief is looking at the meaning of the title. So sometimes that is very obvious, but other times the title is not necessarily what you think. And because as designers, we're given, like, that's a non-negotiable, the title, that is the word, those are the words that are going to appear on the cover. But how we treat those words and how we play images off against those words is sort of what's really interesting to me. And I think Jack touched on that a little bit in his opening. And then the other thing that I love to think about, which is also put there by the author, is in the manuscript, I love to find recurring imagery. And this is mostly in novels. And sometimes I feel like they put it there just for me when I find it. So for example, when a fox appears in a novel on more than one occasion, or the family estate in the novel is named Fox Corner, and the family name is Todd, which is a Middle English word for fox, then you'd better do a cover design with fox on it. And that's what happened when I did Kate Atkinson's cover, Life After Life. And I had heard at the time that Kate liked it, and that was great. But what really confirmed it was this story from the publisher that said that after this book came out, she did a kitchen renovation, and she had custom tiles made for her kitchen with this fox painted on these custom tiles. So I felt like I had passed that test. I had found the thing in the book that she had wanted on her cover, whether she knew that at the time or not. But yeah,
very nice.
I mean, I have had a lot of really amazing interactions with with editors and with authors, and it is my favorite thing to connect with an author about a cover. But often it comes later, like after we've got it right. So
that's so true. I would say, how do you guys feel, Kelly, Blair? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. I think I guess my relationship with the author starts with reading the manuscript in a strange way, because we don't have a ton of, we don't have direct contact so much with the author at Knopf and Pantheon. And I actually think that is valuable. I see the editor as sort of a catalyst for the book, and the, kind of the medium or the connector between the author and the whole inside of the publishing kind of machine. And I think that there's a lot of value probably in buffering that relationship. I can only imagine that how overwhelming it would be to be involved in so many different parts of what publishing a book involves, including the cover, for an author. So my biggest hope is that the authors are happy, but we communicate through the editor for the most part.
It's really interesting. Yeah. I can't imagine not having like direct contact with the author, although I can see the benefits as well, because sometimes it can be overwhelming to have a lot of input from the author. But also, I guess I can imagine, because when I started working at Dundurn, the editor was the person, the direct contact. And I found sometimes there was sort of an issue, or like maybe varying results, because all the editors have different styles of delivering the cover. And I found they gave it, with varying levels of enthusiasm, and sometimes they're afraid of giving the feedback to me as the designer. So I don't know, maybe do the editors have like training on how they bring you feedback and stuff?
I don't know. Good question. I don't know if they get training or if they just are careful about it.
I think they try to be kind.
Yeah.
But one thing you learn.
Yeah, I just found like.
Sorry, go ahead, Laura.
Oh, just sometimes editors were like sitting on their email from the author for like a week because they didn't want to tell me how the bad news.
Well, one thing you do learn, I think, is not to take anything too personally when you get into book design. Well, I take the good stuff. Yeah. I take that to heart.
For sure.
Well, we put so much thought into it. That's true. And we do get kind of attached to our ideas in a way, I guess, like because we are, creating covers that have an emotional pull for the reader as well, right? So, but I agree. I think we totally kind of develop a thick skin on feedback. I don't know, what's your experience, Jack?
I've only been freelance for about 2 years, so I'm still trying to work out, what questions I'd want to ask an author, or like what's the best way to work with an editor. One of the things I'm really enjoying at the moment is kind of just reading the book and not really having much of a brief, or not having much of a discussion, or not having any interaction with the author at first, because then you can just respond to just the book in kind of an isolation, and then you can go back and they'll say, we hate everything you did, and then you have a conversation. But I think there's something really valuable about that. I mean, I think there could be so many conversations between an author and an editor, and like marketing and publicity and sales, and like all these different ideas floating around, and that's really valuable in many cases. But in other cases, it's really nice to not have any of that like kind of impact what you're going to do with the book cover, and to just read the book, respond to the book alone. And I think sometimes that can garner really exciting results, sometimes terrible results as well. Obviously, some stuff that's way off, but I'm really enjoying that at the moment, because I think you can bring stuff to the table that people may have not thought of or struck off the list in their discussions, even though they might be successful routes. But I also think that, I'm probably rarely going to be in working freelance the way I do. That I'm probably rarely going to be in touch with authors, so I have to hope that's a good way for me to work moving forward. But I think it's a case by case situation as well, and everywhere does stuff kind of differently, but not too differently. And like there's many different ways to do it, and it's quite interesting hearing everyone's different approach. Like Laura, I think I haven't really spoken to very many people who have such interactions with the authors, and that, like, it's quite interesting that seems to be, from my understanding, quite a rare thing in the industry.
Yeah, so I think it might be a thing, like a small house type thing, an independent publisher. I was very involved in like the way that we created the whole cover process. So I created that brief, and Kelly Hill, I have to say, I love the idea of adding the significance of the title to the brief. I'm going to steal that for sure.
Second that. I actually just wrote that down.
Sometimes you're reading a manuscript and you're like, this book is called, the bag full of frogs, but you finish the manuscript and there's no frogs in the entire thing, and you're like, what?
What's the
That's a really-
metaphor?
Yeah, well, what is the cross? But like having that as part of the process, like it makes so much sense. I've never heard that be discussed properly before either. It's a good tip.
Well,
Oh,
I was just going to say there are those times when the manuscript is not fully done or ready, and we may get an excerpt to work with. So you're working with the title, an excerpt. Does that change anything for you?
It's just less information to work with, but I feel like we have to stay sort of nimble, and things are always changing, edits are happening, storylines change, and it's really just kind of about communication with the author and editor through the editor, and yeah, just staying open to kind of listening to what is changing. But yeah, I think that we've all probably designed from a small portion of a manuscript and then from the whole novel, I would guess.
And I suppose that's another place where that kind of thick skin in a different way comes in, that you have to sometimes be like, oh yeah, I've done these, and they're like, oh, the book has changed dramatically, where it's gone in a different direction, and to be okay with being like, okay, we can pivot to a new direction. And that's like, yeah, that's quite an important part of the job, I guess, as well. It doesn't get talked about that often, is the doing lots of stuff in different directions.
And I think
also,
go ahead, Laura.
I was going to add too, I love seeing authors comp covers, what they think is a good cover, what they could imagine working well on their book. I find there's a lot of information in that as well.
Or when they put a cover on there they really don't want it to look like, or a few that they really don't want to, you kind of go, oh, okay, you've got, got to steer clear of those directions. I think that's always really telling as well, the ones that they want to avoid.
And then it's always tricky if sales puts up those exact covers as comparison titles that they would like it to look like.
Yeah.
That's the dance we have to do.
Totally. Great discussion, guys. I do want to get to another question. We must encourage and support voices that have long been marginalized. And I know Kelly and I, we are having a lot of conversation, training, and reflection about diversity and inclusion in our workplace. How is this reflection influencing your book design? And I know, Laura, we had talked before that you had done some research, and I think you mentioned it tonight as well, that you'd done some research to find the artist for The Son of the House, Aaron Marin. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me about that? Like, what did it involve?
Well, so like Dundurn has, as a small independent Canadian publisher, we have a limited budget for hiring illustrators, but I try to like set aside at least the majority of that for books or covers that would benefit from having a perspective other than mine, someone with a similar background to, or like at least some background that relates to the content, to bring in a greater depth of knowledge and avoid stereotypes, which can be a pitfall if the designer doesn't have a great understanding of the subject.
Good point.
So yeah, I guess there's an ever expanding amount of resources for finding illustrators. There's a ton of websites that feature designers that will like bring in, you can like filter by cultural background or, various filters that you can apply if you're looking for a specific designer. Off the top of my head, there's a really great website called Women Who Draw, which I love checking out. Black and Brown Book Designers is a website and an Instagram. It's a great resource. I don't know, I mean, I guess I could go on and on, but there's just like a ton of resources out there for, I just received from the printer today this book, Di Bain di Zuin, an Ojibwe and Anishinaabe pedagogy, and I thought it was a good example of a book where I wouldn't be the right person to work on the design. It was important for me to look for an illustrator to work on it. So I found the artist Mariah Miwa-Sige on a website called the Native Designer List, which is interesting because, I mean, there's not always going to be like a handy list for every designer that you're looking for. So you need to sit down and do the research. But before launching into a design, like, question whether or not you're the right person to do it or someone else would be more appropriate.
Yeah, it definitely, I think searching is something we're all kind of looking at, like finding new ways to search, not just the, just by agencies, or it's like reaching beyond that. Did you guys have any thoughts on that, Jack or Kelly Hill, Kelly Blair?
I thought what you said about the tropes is really, or like, stereotypes, or there's certain things that come up, and I think a lot of times those things happen because people aren't putting in the proper research to understand the different cultures that they're perhaps representing on a cover, or the different stories that they're trying to tell. And I think that, as I said, that the research and really putting that time in there is something that, well, helps to not use stereotypes that you often see on book covers. I think that's a very good point.
Yeah, because it's not to say that you have to pair like a specific artist with this author of the same background. There's like nuances to it.
Very true.
Something we talk about a lot at work also is I guess fostering people who maybe didn't come from a book jacket background, who are could bring like totally interesting perspectives to book jacket design, and I guess like mentoring or reaching out, finding designers from different backgrounds rather than just like art schools. And I think in some ways the pandemic has been so difficult for everyone, but it also opens up like such a more flexible, broader way of working people from anywhere. So I guess hopefully that's sort of an exciting possibility in expanding, diversity in design and art and book jackets.
And opening the pathways that people could kind of come into the absolutely, like
even for people who could work in-house who don't live in a major city where publishing is rooted.
And I also like, I don't know how you guys feel, but it almost feels that design, illustration, all the things we talk about now are kind of getting to a realm where there's lots of people who don't have a background studying design working at it, and I think we need to adapt ourselves to not think that there's one route way into doing something, and people can come from all different pathways and come from all different places, and that's can be very successful as well, and that's only going to open the doors for a much better working community, I think.
Yeah, because that's probably one of the main reasons why Canadian publishing has such a lack of diversity. Like, you have to do 1 to 3 internships just to get in the door, and like that's not accessible for everyone. Just
right, and that's part of
entry.
Yeah, and that's also another thing we're looking at too, is like finding other ways to get people in for internships. Did you have anything to add just quickly, Kelly Hill?
Yeah, we've been talking about with our art director doing some mentorship program of some sort, and I think that's a really exciting thing to look at. For the short term, I feel like we're assigned books all the time. So as designers, we can kind of bring forth these more marginalized voices as photographers or illustrators, and sometimes those artists are suggested by the authors. I've had a couple of situations where that happens, but I like what you said, Laura, about the idea of not necessarily having to use an Indigenous artist on an Indigenous book, and we can just kind of just use talent and on these books.
I guess
Yeah.
it depends if you're like trying to get at a traditional style of art, or
Right.
you obviously don't want to be.
Mhm.
Well, and there's also using, like, I know we were looking for an Indigenous artist who's Indigenous, that the author felt, Wab Canoe felt very strongly about having an Indigenous artist working on his cover, but wasn't necessarily a traditionally styled. And we did come up with someone, Wab came up with someone who's fantastic. He's a perfect fit. And, but it's hard to kind of find those artists because they aren't traditional, but
and the internet keeps giving you the things that you say you like, and so sometimes it is harder to come up with these others, but I think it's it's worth doing those deeper dives for all books.
Oh, the other a good thing that I've seen publishers doing recently too is calls for submission when you're looking for an artist. I haven't done it myself, but yeah, it's a great way to find people.
Yeah, we haven't done that yet either. Like using our social media to reach out to potentially get those people in. So we are getting close to getting into the Q&A. So I'll just ask quickly, you guys, you got a couple of trends, top trends that you think might influence your work this year. Jack, would you like to go first? What are your top trends, top two trends?
Well, someone else, John Gray, was saying quite recently that everything is really bright, really zingy at the moment, and he was saying that it's because we're trying to replicate RGB because we're all Instagram is so prevalent, Bookstagram, and so that's the pushback of that. So I reckon now you got to go black and white or like really dull just to be against the grain. And the other trend is book cover trends, because there's so many articles coming out about book cover trends. That is the new trend, is spotting them as well, which is mad.
But as soon as you name them, they're kind of ruined, right?
Yeah, absolutely. They're off the table.
That's right. Did Laura Boyle, what do you think? Is there a top trend
kind of
on
along
your
the same
mind?
vein. Oh, I don't know. I was gonna add the way that digital platforms influence typography, because now everything also has to be really legible at thumbnail size. And that's just the reality, I think, that we have to accept, that we want our covers to be really visible. But it'll be interesting to learn how to still create like really original type within those parameters, I guess.
Very good. So I think I could move to the Q&A, because there's some interesting questions here. And since we have people from the UK and the US and Canada, of course, there is a question. I have a UK edition with a different cover for What Strange Paradise. Do artists of the original design collaborate with international covers? And we get asked this often, and sometimes it even comes up in promotion. You might see the UK cover, or we might see the US cover, and there's a Canadian cover. Who would like to take that question first? Maybe Kelly Blair, would you like to take the question first, because it's
Sure.
based on What Strange Paradise?
Yeah, sometimes foreign markets will pick up our jacket that we did, but a lot of times we're publishing at different time periods, and oftentimes we will be designing our jacket after the UK. And I think that it's interesting, as global as everything is, I think that there is a really different design language in different countries, which I think is like amazing, because I don't know, everything has become sort of homogenized. So when I see something like a different vernacular, it's exciting. But I think it's like each publisher kind of decides whether they're going to pick up or do something new. But I rarely communicate. We don't collaborate so much with a foreign publisher.
No.
I know
Kelly
in
Hill?
Canada, yeah, I know in Canada when we see a book from the US that we are publishing in Canada, and the question is always whether we'll keep the US cover or whether we think we need something different for our market. And what you're weighing off is all the marketing that goes into and behind a US title. And if we have a different cover, are we going to benefit from that if it looks entirely different? And so yeah, it's always kind of weighing off those two things of, you know, the marketing and being recognizable, and then thinking that that Canada has a different kind of aesthetic than the US does, which I agree, it's interesting. I don't know what it is, but exactly.
And here's a question we get asked a lot. It is historical fiction novels often have women as main characters on the cover. They could be walking away, they could be facing us, they're walking, I could even add they're walking in foggy scenes, or we don't see their face. How does that happen? How does this become the cover approach for a genre? And it's kind of tough because I feel like when you have a genre like historical fiction, there are some tropes we kind of have to stay with because they're signals to readers. Who would like to, Laura?
Well, it's a very convenient way to show a woman and also not have her face be the thing that like sticks in the reader's mind as being the character that they're reading, which I think most readers find a little distracting. So.
True. We don't want to necessarily define the character on the cover. We may want to sort of explore a relationship though. So, you know, there may be that, or a setting, and to make the setting interesting or to have more of a narrative, we could be adding a person to it, I think. Jager, do you work on any historical fiction at all, or?
Yeah, and I can almost visualize the cover that's being described, you know what I mean? Because there's almost a familiar formula that a lot of covers fall into, and it's interesting trying to think about how that happens. As I said, like they're signifiers to the reader, so that, you know, they're almost self-fulfilling prophecy. The more of them we do, the more that they, you know, solidify that something needs to look like that. I think it's really hard for publishers to like break out of that mold, because you're worried that you're not going to fly that flag to a possible reader, and they'll miss it. But genres such as historical fiction, I think, can be so exciting and visually, like, you know, the possibilities are endless. But we still are, you know, have to make sure that we're not ignoring any possible readers by not playing to some of those notes. But it's funny how those things happen. I assume they happen because one book a long time, you know, ages ago, had that approach, and then a few other books at the time emulated it, and then everyone started emulating it, and then, you know, there's too much momentum behind that style of that approach, and now we can't stop it. The momentum's too strong. But it's all over publishing, and every now and again something comes along that'll break that momentum, and it's very exciting when that happens, and we can see a genre or style kind of be disrupted. But yeah, I know it's funny when it's identified. When you see it, you're like, oh, all those books kind of do that.
And I've seen book designers be blamed for that on social media as well. And of course, what we're reacting to is direction, often from in-house. And it is true, if you do go, but there are tables full of those books. So it's not just one or two of them. These books are all finding their historical fiction readers, or we wouldn't continue kind of doing it. But I think as a designer, you want to kind of push those, the way those books look, just a little bit further into something new, but also not lose your reader in the process.
That sweet spot in between the two,
yeah, or at least make sure they're well designed. And sometimes you do it through gritted teeth, but you know, the whole point of the book, or a large part of the book design, is trying to put the reader or the book in front of the right reader. So.
Right. And, you know, we're just talking about historical fiction, but it can happen really in any genre, I would think.
Like thrillers, suspense books all have a very similar kind of look right now.
Right.
One thing I would say about book jacket trends that I find interesting is I think every book jacket designer I know is always trying to get I don't know, push the limits and always trying to get something approved that feels exciting and new and fresh and different. And the strange thing is, like, we're all working in our sort of little vacuum and the books don't come out for a year. So when things emerge as a trend, we haven't been seeing all of the books that come out at the same time. And it always fascinates me to wonder, like, what cultural influences are we all sort of like breathing in through osmosis that we're all kind of reacting to at the same time as well. I think you can't separate design from what's happening in the larger cultural world with art and anything that we're consuming, TV even.
True. I mean, I think any aspect of design has influences, you know, its group, right? Like we see it in clothing and in fashion and in interiors as well. So there's lots of influences there. Okay, here's kind of a practical question for everybody. How many mock covers do you create for a title? And what is the timeline from mock-up to final? That's a tough one because it could be right away, you could be done, or you could be, it could take full 3 months or more, I guess. What would you say, Laura?
I've done up to 25 once. I think I did about 25, but usually I aim for like between 3 and 5 concepts.
3 and 5
I'll usually do like more than I actually show to the group that decide on the covers, because I'll scrap a couple on my own, but you know.
And how many times do you go through that process of showing 2 or 3, or do you often nail it after when you're presenting?
There's so much variation in that. I can't think of. I had one book this season that I did only one mock-up for. It was just perfect. It like nailed it right away.
We look
and
forward
I
to
nailed
it.
So it's one of those rare instances, but.
What about you, Kelly Hill? You're a seasoned designer, so
yeah. So I've done anywhere from 3 to, like, honestly, I did like 60 one time for a book. So yeah, it varies. And then, so I'm always thinking about timeline, and so we're getting cover briefs for this, or we've had cover briefs for a little while now for this fall's book. So those go to press, I don't know, in the spring at some point. So so you usually have, we're meant to have book cover designs in 4 weeks from when we get the brief. We used to have a shorter amount of time, but I fought against that because I always felt like I needed more time to kind of to read it and then process everything that you need to think about. And
yeah, I would say I average about 40. You know what? I average about 40 mock-ups. Those are just like some of it is my experimental stuff, things I just have to get out of my head and out of the way. You know, I think they might be a good idea, but really, no. And then I get on to the good stuff and I get into kind of a zone of creating some art. And you know, we do create little works of art. And yes, we sometimes use like stock images, but it's a lot of like playing off of those stock images and recreating stuff. So yeah, like you could have a ton of work and not even show it. Right? What about you, Kelly Blair? You've been doing this for a while too.
Yeah, I guess it's sort of like an iceberg. You just see this little tip of the iceberg, but underneath there are a lot of rejected sketches. It's part of the process. Yeah.
Very true.
I'm trying to work all this stuff out as well, so I don't have the benefit of being in house to like have conversations with editors or anyone I'm showing stuff to. But one thing I've found is that sometimes if I've done one thing, if I do 5 or 6 different things and one of them feels really right, I'll just send that in, knowing that I have the other ones, because sometimes people won't go for the more exciting one if it's next to something that's a bit more familiar. So, by removing the context of some perhaps safer, more expected options, you kind of force people to really engage with something, and they might still reject it, and then you have to send the other ones in anyway. But I'm trying to find ways to kind of nudge people into perhaps going with a slightly more exciting route than they might do if they're presented with, more exciting ones to less exciting ones. And it's quite interesting trying to work out how to do that. But again, it's the iceberg, I think, is the perfect analogy.
Right. And and like you mentioned off air, I think if you don't get a design approved for a hardcover, it could end up as a paperback.
Exactly. Yeah, you got to hold on to those rejected covers. They're very, very important. They never die.
I've had people say, like, if only we could publish the book that belongs with this cover. Maybe commission a writer to create it.
I know people. I think people are kind as well when they look at our covers sometimes, and they'll say, "Save it for another book," and it's like that never happens. But I am going to save it because I put a lot of work into it. Okay, one last question from the Q&A. How do you become a book jacket designer? Do you have to get degrees? What do you guys think? I feel like the landscape's changing a little bit, but degrees do help. Who would like to go? I mean, Laura Boyle, I know you have a lot of experience, a lot of education, or not a lot of education, but like you've got an English degree, right? And
I have an art history degree and
art history degree.
Yeah, I mean, I want to say something that's really encouraging to people who want to get into book design, but it's really hard. Well, it's not that it's hard, it's more like a fluke, I think. At least that's how it felt when I was, I guess, sort of aiming towards that. But I think, I guess, just build up a really strong portfolio, even if they're maybe for fake covers, like just come up with a lot of ideas, because you'll probably be hired on the strength of your versatility and work.
That's what I would say. I would say redesign your favorite books, design new covers for those books. So yeah,
I think
people can see what you're all about.
Yeah, I think our creative director has mentioned that too. Go out, design some book covers, because it really is, it's not as simple as it looks. Okay, last question, just a few short answers. What is your main hope for the future of books and book design? You guys have a sentence or two on what you think of that. Kelly Hill, do you want to lead us?
I've been thinking about this, and it's more generally towards books and physical books. And I feel like the demise of books has long been predicted and greatly exaggerated. So, I mean, everybody thought when ebooks came out that physical books were going to go away. And that, of course, hasn't happened. Physical books are still selling. And I sort of feel like book design is still maybe even more important because, like we've mentioned, like you have to be able to see a book cover on a little screen like this, and they're more than ever kind of a marketing tool as well. So I'm not worried about books or book design.
Kelly, Blair, do you have any thoughts on that? You're in the US. You have lots of customers.
This isn't the future, but it's the present. I'm grateful that people are still buying books and that we're still thriving in this crazy world that we're in right now. And I guess like my future hope for books is just that we keep publishing like the most interesting stories and reaching readers, and that's same for book jacket design in the most interesting way possible. So hopefully book jacket design will stay interesting and still sell books.
Laura Boyle.
Yeah, I agree. I'm constantly like totally in awe of the book covers. Like every single day I see a book cover that I'm like, oh, that's so good. So I just feel inspired by what's coming out, and just keep going.
And Jack?
Yeah, like I think what we already talked about diversity, a bit earlier on, but I think that's something that is really important for the future of book cover design and publishing as a whole. I think that's something that I have a lot of hope for, especially over in the UK. There's some people doing absolutely incredible work and changing the way things are operating. And if that doesn't give you hope for publishing as a whole, like I don't know what will. It's quite an amazing time at the moment, and I'm really excited to see what the next couple of years hold. And my big hope as well, I already mentioned, fewer articles about book cover trends. It makes me feel bad if I see something I've done mentioned. I'm like, oh no, that's just a part of a trend now. But yeah.
So true. And we are in the culture. This is a culture. It's entertainment as well for people, books. That's my thought on it. And as long as we need culture, as long as we need to hear voices, diverse voices and new voices and personal stories, I really feel like that's all very important. And I love the industry. I love books for that reason. Thank you all very much for tonight. It has been fantastic talking to you guys. I think Alana is going to come on soon. And I want to thank her on your behalf. I know she invited us to talk tonight, and we couldn't be happier with that chance. Thank you very much, Alana.
Thank you, Lisa and Kelly and Laura and Jack. You guys were amazing. I learned so much about so much. So much I didn't know about book design and all the intricacies. So thank you for the most edifying conversation I've had the pleasure of enjoying. I wanted to say that for anybody who missed tonight's video, it will be available on our YouTube channel and also on our website in the coming days. I want to thank you again, and also let you know that to please come back, check us out on February 15th, when we'll be having another master panel to mark Black History Month. Thanks again for joining, and good night.